The cloud. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Breakthrough Assault and No Dice, No Glory roundtable discussion for HMGS CyberCon. I'm Tom Burgess. I'm one of the NG moderators, and I'm also joined by Ed Sales. Out there, Ed?
I am here.
All right. And then from the UK, Mark Goddard from Breakthrough Assault.
Hey, everyone.
All right. And then our special guest today, they're the main event. Phil Yates from Battlefront Miniatures and Chris Townley from Battlefront Miniatures.
Hey, everyone.
All right. So before we get started, if you would, if you're not one of the co-hosts, go ahead and mute your mic and put your camera off. It'll help out. As Mark was saying earlier, there's a chat box option. If you kind of rotate your cursor around the bottom of the screen, you'll see a chat icon in the middle. And you click that, it'll open up on the right side of the screen, and you can type in what you want to say. And then Ed, myself, and Mark will kind of go through those and feed questions to Phil and Chris as we go along. We have a lot of other open questions for them as well that we've got prepared in case you don't have a lot, but it looks like we've got a lot of folks on there. So I think we ought to have some pretty interesting input from the field there. So without any further ado, I think I'd like to go ahead and start it off. So, and I'll give an easy question right off the bat that I've always wondered. It was my first one on the list that we sent to him to kind of get some ideas. Is what inspired Flames of War? I mean, what drove this game concept, and this would be particularly for Phil, and to produce this game and put it out there, and because it's had a huge impact. You know, you can play now everything in the 20th century almost. I mean, from World War I all the way up to the 1990s now. We only got a decade left to cover there. so what drove this very versatile, very, very playable game set?
Well, it's an interesting tale. As you might guess, I've been writing wargames rules since I was relatively small. And in the mid-90s, I was in a little town called Wanganui and writing and playing with the local guys. And my wife said, you know, the stuff you're doing is really boring. And about that time, 40K 3rd edition had come out in the local shop in town. And I sort of had a brief look at it. By the way, I literally still never played 40K in my life. But thought, okay, well, let's sort of see what we can do with this in World War II. And ended up writing a thing called Warhammer Panzer Battles. And then in 2000, I went to the National Convention here in New Zealand and demonstrated it. By that time, World War II was a dead period in New Zealand. Absolutely nothing going on for about 10 years. So it's like, it's my passion. Let's see how many other people I can get excited by this. And so I set up a stand or a table in the convention hall, and people came and played, and it seemed to be going well. And then on the Sunday afternoon, this guy came over and said, from Battlefront stand, who was next to me, nice miniatures, 15 millimeter, lovely stuff. But I was already collecting, the HO scale, 176 stuff and so forth. And it's like, I'm not going to throw out my whole collection and start again. But they came over and said, can we have a game? I was like, sure, anyone can. So Colin and Pete had a game and went away. And then a while later, Pete came and said, would you like to write a game for us? I was like, really? I haven't finished this one yet. And have you any idea how much work this is? He said, no, we'll pay you. And it's like, really? And he said, no. Tell you what, bring your wife up to Auckland next weekend and we'll put you up in a hotel and we'll talk about it. By the end of the weekend, we had a plan, and I was going to take a year off from work and work for Battlefront for a year to write Flames of War and other things. 20 years later, not quite, another month and it'll be 20 years later. And I'm still taking my year off. So that was the genesis of it. And the other interesting thing going on at the same time is Dallas Eves, a friend of mine, had started collecting the Battlefront miniatures. Great painter, lovely stuff. And was like, you need to write me a game for this. And I was like, okay, sometime. And then when this came along, I basically sat down at his dining table and said, okay, here's a T-34 and a Tiger. Can they shoot each other when they're, getting on the screen, a bit further apart than that on the table? And he said, nah. So he moved them closer, and he said, yeah, they should be able to shoot each other at about that distance. And so, okay, so, here's some infantry. How far apart should they be able to shoot each other? And so we sat down and just worked out the parameters, and then ran through some free gaming of, okay, so an infantry unit assaults this infantry unit. So what should happen? And then over the next months, my dining room table had lines of infantry on different size bases, different spread out, moving at different rates and so forth, trying to get all of the dynamics working and tanks and things. And it evolved from there into the game you've seen.
I don't know about you guys, but that actually was a really fascinating story to me. And you could really hear when Phil Yates was talking about that, how excited he was. And he, that would take a lot of guts for me. I couldn't do it to set up a stand and try to do that. I give you a lot of credit for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I never realized that. So Battlefront actually had miniatures before it had before it had Flames of War. I didn't start with version 1, so I always assumed it launched with the first range of models.
No, Pete has had gaming things. Pete's the owner of Battlefront. Gaming things going forever. The first contact I had with them was military miniatures in 1987. I was working for the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries and went up to Auckland for something. I have no idea what it was, but I had a morning between finishing what I had to do and catching a plane back down to Wellington. So I walked from the centre of Wellington to Parnell, centre of Auckland to Parnell, which isn't a huge distance, but when you have no idea where you're going, it's a very confusing sort of thing. And finally found in a little basement military miniatures, which was stocked full of lead miniatures of all sorts. And Pete was a major shareholder in that. And then he also had the first gaming company that imported Warhammer and things like that into New Zealand. And then both of those ended up dissolving, and Pete ended up in full control of military miniatures. But his passion is also World War II and so forth. So he had no game. So he contacted some overseas people. They wrote a game, but it didn't really match what Pete was looking for. So he was in the market for a game at that point, and he had a big range already. But it's very hard to sell Wargames figures if there's no good game to sell them with. So my job was to basically provide a reason for people to buy Battlefront miniatures. And I think I might have succeeded a little bit with that. Not on my own by any means. Pete was a constant input into the thing of, that's too complicated, or what about this? And really, without Pete's input, things would have been way, way, way different from what they are.
So in this first part, we were going to get a lot into design. For those folks out there, we kind of worked out a game plan to talk about game philosophy and design, then move into some of the stuff about the SS book that's soon to be released, and then kind of maybe talk a little way ahead after that. But the one thing that you mentioned there when you said you were working out and this is not what, you were talking about working out the distances and what felt right. Is that where the idea of the kind of exponential range scale came up, where you kind of expand further out, where it's not a linear it's a mathematical concept, but basically is that where that came into being?
Sort of, although I'd already sort of had vague thoughts about that. But if you're going to have artillery and tanks and infantry armed with submachine guns on the table and doing their thing, then yeah, when you're sort of this close and getting close to submachine gun range, then the scale, okay, it's still way off 1/100th, but it's quite a large scale. But then, if you're going to have the length of the table being 10 kilometers for artillery or something, yeah, I already sort of had a feeling that it needed to do that. But my background is I studied operations research at university, and that's what I was working in for quite a while. that's basically using maths to solve management problems or solve military problems, business problems, whatever. And so I have a fairly strong mathematical analytical background. So as soon as that idea of I want all these things to fit on the table came along, then yeah, naturally for me, the mathematics of, okay, it has to be some sort of exponential scale where, you know, here's 50 meters, here's 200 meters, here's, you know, 1,000 meters and so forth. Yeah, maths is sort of a language that just naturally happens.
Well, I don't know if you know Sam Mustafa. He does the Honor Game series.
Great guy.
I've been a play tester for him previously, and one of the things that he said in our play test group was that that he admired about Flames of War, which sometimes is criticism from other folks, was number one, the abandoning of a actual fixed ground scale and a time scale. He actually was thought those were some great concepts that, and some of his games kind of employed similar ideas later on. So
yeah.
Just wanted to share that with you in case you never talked to him about it.
No, I only actually ever started talking to Sam over the last year or so. But yeah, great guy. One of the, you're talking about timescale, that thought precedes Flames of War by about 10 years. And while I was working at the Ministry of Ag and Fisheries, I read an article about command cycles. It wasn't something that a young man at that point was familiar with as a concept. But the idea of a command cycle is the time it takes for an order to be given, the order to be implemented, the enemy to react, and the information to come back so you can issue a new order. And there was, in the 90s, or late 80s and the 90s, lots and lots of efforts to create command control rules in war games. And there were all sorts of interesting things people were doing, from PK, which had draw a card to see who moves next, which was a radical idea when that came out. They had people with, you know, old-fashioned, okay, it's going to take you 5 moves to implement this order type stuff. And it was like, well, actually, what really matters is my turn consists of me issuing an order, me trying to implement the order, you responding to the order in your turn, and then I have my next turn. And that's a command cycle. That is literally a command cycle. Now, the command cycle is much more mechanical and fixed in a war game, or at least in a I go, you go war game, than it is in reality. But that's sort of like, okay, so what a turn isn't any period of time. It's the time between me issuing an order and me getting a response back to issue another order. And that thought was one of the ones that drove some of the, as you say, ground scale differences and so forth. And the fact that, for instance, a turn can vary a lot, like old-fashioned rules. Oh, laying a minefield, that's going to take 2 hours. Since your turn is 10 minutes, that's going to take you 12 turns. Not going to happen in a game. If your game takes 12 turns and nothing's happening that you can lay a minefield or something, then it's pretty boring, or clear a minefield or something, it's pretty boring. But if I'm issuing orders and saying, okay, the next stage in our attack or defense or whatever is we clear the minefield, then what I'm expecting to happen is I wait, sit there twiddling my thumbs for 2 hours while my guys clear the minefield. And then I do the next thing. And so that's why you get things that take hours happening in one turn, and you get things that take minutes happening in one turn. If I've ordered an assault, then, you know, I'm going to find out in fairly short order, not as fast as Hollywood makes it sound like, probably might find out in 20 minutes, half an hour, or maybe even 15 if I was lucky and could see what was going on. But, you know, I'll find that out pretty quick what happened, or watching a skirmish. But then some things take a long time. But they're all, for me, one sort of decision. And so if you collapse the time from decision to decision into turn to turn, you get a game that flows from key point to key point. And I think that's also one of the things that causes people to say, you know, it's the movie of the war sort of thing. And I'm sort of quite happy that people feel that way about it, because it shows that the game is hitting the highlights of what you're trying to do as a commander without bothering about the boring bits.
So that would be like the decisive points, like if you're going through deliberate planning, the kind of the key things, and that kind of answered my I guess one of the questions I had is I think that's what you're most proud about with the Flames of War, as far as it is accomplished as a game.
Yeah, I was thinking about this over the last couple of weeks since you invited me here, and the key things I want in a game are that it tells a story. The participants at the end of the game should be able to sit down with their favorite beverage with their friend and go, oh, wow, what just happened? And tell a story that they're excited about, that their friend wants to hear, and that sounds like something that might actually have happened. And then to get that to work, the two things that are needed is the game has to be fast enough that the person hasn't got bored. They don't want to watch a 4-hour movie that could have been a 1.5-hour movie. And the other thing is it needs that the rules get out of the way. And that's a concept I can credit to my wife. The rules of the game basically are there to create the world in which you and the other person or people are creating an immersive experience for yourselves. So if you have to go and look up the rule book or have to think about how the rules work, then that takes you out of the experience. So everything was designed to be, okay, I want people for 90% of the stuff they're going to do in a Flames of War game, I want it to be something that they get, after 10 minutes, they've already know how to play the game and they don't have to look anything up and so forth. And the new V4 cards, I think, help a lot with that for beginners and so forth, because they don't even have to find the right page in the thing and look up stats and so forth. It's like, oh, yep, that number, keep going. So, yeah, it's that whole storytelling, immersive thing is the thing that I'm really happy about.
All right, we got a question from James McMillan coming in. He's asking, how much does aiming to balance games for competitive style gaming impact against that story kind of timeline you were just talking about?
I see it as actually something that enhances the story possibilities of the game. If the players or the organizer of the event or something has to spend time trying to balance things and make sure that everybody's going to have fun and it's actually going to produce a good story, then that takes away from just getting in there, throwing some dice and having fun. So to me, it's an underlying thing of a good game system that it's easy to get a situation where you have a high confidence that it's going to produce a fun game. Now, competitive gaming takes that to another step and also introduces people who are trying to push the limits of the system and less interested in the story and more interested in the competitive play and so forth. But I think a good, robust game system can handle both. And I think if it can't handle competitive gaming, then it puts an extra workload on the organizer. So I think, for instance, Black Powder is a brilliant system. And it's a great way of spending an afternoon or an evening with a bunch of friends and your favorite beverages and having a great time. But it does take quite a bit of organization and sort of cooperation to make everything work. And if you've got a bunch of friends and that's your goal is to, let's just have a great time for the afternoon, that's good. But, you know, the reality is a lot of people end up playing games at the club, at the store or whatever, and, you know, to a large extent, possibly pick-up games or close to pick-up games. Hey, Chris, let's go and have a game next Saturday. Make it late war and I'm bringing my British. And that's often the extent of the planning for a lot of people when they're wargaming. And so to a degree, that's almost a tournament setting in a way. So if that works there, then it'll work in a tournament. If it works in a tournament, it'll work there. So yeah, as I said, I think it's something that enhances the ability for people to get a story out of a game with minimal work.
All right, great. Mark, Ed, you want to ask anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in one. So obviously version 4's really well bedded in now with mid-war and late wars coming on and on. it was quite a step change to version 4 in terms of accessibility and the start of presentation of how you build armies. And obviously, I think reflects really well that the game is developed from version 1 all the way to version 4. It survived and flourished, got new players in. But as it's bedded in, I suppose it's a multi-part question. First of all, as the designer, in retrospect, what if you could change one thing to another? You could go back and change one thing when you're writing version 4. What would it be? And if there is one thing you're most proud of in the change to version 4?
Well, if I was going back to redo version 4, mostly it would be a matter of rewriting to put the lessons from the front stuff more clearly in. And then there'd be a whole pile of new questions that would come from that, from little things that weren't the most clear they could be. But I think after so much time and with a big team behind us, sort of working on it, and Pete and Chris and everyone else at Battlefront sort of having their input, plus all the playtesters having their input, I think the game came out fairly solid. And the fact that, I mean, sometimes Pete complains, oh, the FAQ, lessons from the front, is so big. And everybody says, have you seen any other games FAQ? And that sort of makes me feel like, well, we didn't do too bad a job. And
yeah, have you met Game
really
Workshop?
Wordy FAQ.
My follow-up question would be, when you were talking about the game rules being kind of movie-esque, right? Have you guys ever created any scenarios? For example, one of the ones I've tried to do is Save It Private Ryan, where you have the German Grenadier Company, 2 Tigers, 2 Martyrs going against American paratroopers. Have you guys ever set up one of those scenarios?
Well, if you go back to the beginning of the NAM project, when, what was it called when the first pamphlet came out, Chris, do you recall?
We Were Soldiers.
We Were Soldiers was the movie, but I don't think that's what we called the first.
iDrang was the, when it came out in War Games Illustrated, iDrang.
Yeah. So the whole of the NAM project came out of basically trying to refight that movie. Evan, one of our lead sculptor, who was there long before Battlefront Miniatures Battlefront, Pete was talking to Pete and started sculpting a helicopter, I think it was. And Pete came in and said, right, I want a Vietnam game. I was like, okay, this will be fun. And we basically created a game that you could refight iDrang, and then that sort of expanded out to what NAM is at the moment. So yeah, on a very big scale, most definitely. But yeah, movie storylines are often something that sort of appears in games and things, and some of the scenarios. Along with historical battles. One of the new missions that have occurred in one of the D-Day books, I'm not sure which one, was actually inspired by the Battle of Albuera in 1810, 1811? I can't remember, 1810 I think it was, in the Spanish Peninsula during the Napoleonic Wars. It's like, that was a really interesting battle. How could you translate that into Flames of War? And I've always wanted to, but never actually got myself organized to do a battle for the rescue of the Lepanto Stallions, an American cavalry unit right at the end of the war, pushed deep into the Soviet zone with German help to rescue the stallions from the Austrian riding school, the famous Austrian riding school with the white horses doing their high stepping thing and so forth. And roughly at the same time, the Soviets were doing the same thing, trying to rescue their stud horses from the Don Cossack area, which were in Germany as well. So I always thought it would be an interesting scenario with the Americans coming in from one side with German army help, the SS, who were the main foil in the middle, determined to go down fighting and stop everybody from getting anything. And the Soviets coming in from the other side, and both sides tried. My mother is a horse fanatic, so I've grown up with horses, and so they have a fascination for me. And basically, rescue the horses is the big mission, and then drive them back to your side of the table. But I've never actually got around to doing it, which is sad.
And there's a nice Don Stivers painting of that. I think it's the second ACR. I'm not. Is it the second or the third ACR? Was the one that did that liberation of the horses? Yeah. So we've got a question here from Greg, who I believe is my good buddy Greg Gardner from locally. He says, given the abstraction of time and distance, why did you go with individual vehicles and guns, but then squad level for the personnel?
Well, it was one of the sort of design things was we wanted to, focus on historical orders of battle and the feeling of actually, commanding a small group of individuals that mattered to you. So I'd already experimented a lot of the early 90s and with larger scale games and abstract games. And to me, they lack the immediacy of small scale games. So having a platoon where each figure is what it is has a sort of a direct feeling that, my 4 tanks are doing this. But as soon as those 4 tanks represent a battalion, everything becomes a lot more abstract and a lot less easy to grasp. And I think for a lot of gamers, they still treat them as 4 tanks, even though the rules are telling them that these are 40 or 80 tanks or something.
All right. Very good. And we've got Cynthia now asking about what are we doing to try to make the game more accessible? And I'll add on to that is what can you tell us about World of Tanks, and particularly that as a bridgeway or gateway into playing Flames of War and the Flames of War genre games?
Here, I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's been the project leader for World of Tanks. Chris is a big fan of World of Tanks since it came out at the beginning, and when Pete suggested that we could get a World of Tanks license, Chris was one of the cheerleaders for that, and he's been driving the project through to completion and release. So, Chris.
Yeah, I've only wanted to convince Evan to make me a Lerva tank for about the last 5 or 6 years. So in terms of new players, it's a good place to start. So I guess at the moment, it's kind of a hard question to answer in some respects, because our plans, one of the things we did last year, which we thought was quite successful, was the Hobby League. We learned a lot about the community. We learned a lot about where and how people play. And our plan was for this year to dive in deeper and do more with the Hobby League. Some things have happened this year that have meant that encouraging people to go to their local stores and play games and meet other gamers has kind of not really happened so much. And unfortunately, it's really stopped us from building on the Hobby League idea. That was definitely the basis of what we wanted to do anyway. There's nothing better than going into a store or a club and seeing a group of people playing a game and actually having fun, and at the same time there being a mechanic that encourages you to build and paint more stuff and keep coming in and showing off new things to your friends. So we're working on ways to evolve, I guess, the Hobby League and keep that going. During the lockdowns, that's why we were doing the Share Your Hobby project. I guess social media was a pretty miserable place for a while there, and it's always shades of grey anyway. So being able to see people you don't know on the other side of the world actually building new models and actually being excited and sharing their passion, hopefully kept people a little bit more enthusiastic about things and, excuse me, help them to forget about all the real life troubles that they are facing. Moving forward, obviously we've got a range of starter sets, and we keep trying to make sure that those are accessible, both in terms of content and price. probably would say that Hit the Beach is a little bit too cheap for what it's got inside, but no one's complaining, so let's keep doing that. Army deals, once again, I think I've been in Battlefront for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years now, and you see a lot of different opinions over the time as to what an army deal should be. And I think where we've got it now is probably the best. An army deal is something that is useful. It's not a random collection of models. That means that if you're a new player, you've got some stuff that's, you know, some good stuff, some okay stuff, and some random stuff that was thrown in there because we had it. Now, if you pick up an army deal with these latest late war ones, you've actually got the really solid core of an army. You could go in, pick up any of those army deals and say, everything in this box I'm going to use, or everything in this box I'm going to use, and these things are things that I'll use every now and then, but they're still decent and they're still relevant and they're still good. And where possible, I love to pitch it that 2 army boxes makes an amazing army, but it's a side issue. And obviously, you know, you've got a rule book in there. So if you're a new player, if you're trying to get your buddy to play, you say, here, go buy this D-Day American Army deal. Everything is useful. There's a rule book in there for $100 US, and let's be honest, you'll probably find a store that will sell it to you for 90 or 80. You can start playing the game. You don't need to go and spend $500 to start playing Flames. You can spend $100 and dip your toe. And then you can spend a bit more after that. World of Tanks, it'll be interesting to see. Because World of Tanks are pre-assembled and pre-primed and so on, I think there's going to be a lot of Flames of War players that are looking at it and saying, for an extra couple of bucks, I can actually have my tank assembled for me. And I think that could be a very popular choice. Hopefully we'll see people. I know in the past with other games like Tanks, we've seen people crossing over and looking to move from from Tanks to Flames of War. You see a lot of people in games like that asking for, where are the infantry? Where are the anti-tank guns? And of course the answer is go to Flames. World of Tanks is a world of tanks. So, you know, you won't sort of see those things in there. There are plenty of people though that are looking at World of Tanks and thinking, this is just as big as I want to go. You know, it's effectively a complete game in its own right. It doesn't necessarily require you or encourage you to go bigger. But I guess the pathway is there because everything that you buy for World of Tanks will be useful in Flames of War.
How does World of Tanks differ from what had already existed in Tanks?
There's a lot of similarities. That's basically a few tweaks to the rules. Call it a version 3, I guess, if you will. The biggest difference is come around the theming. So World of Tanks has such a rich, highly themed game with their modules, their upgrades, their crew, the way the skills and perks have worked. Everything was around making the game feel like World of Tanks. But the core fundamental concept of you've got an attack pool of dice versus a defense pool of dice, that's the same.
Very good. We also have a question. I guess this will get us back into Flames of War Team Yankee area. From Tom Castanos, is talking about artillery here, and sometimes he thinks it's too powerful or too little. So he wants to know what your philosophy is on artillery in both Flames of War and Team Yankee.
Okay, that's an interesting question. The driver for design decisions beyond playability and a good story for me is trying to make something match its historical role and performance. So, excuse me, now I'm going to cough after Chris has finished all his talking. One of the ways you see that is in Flames of War with the ranging in rolls. It's sort of a mechanism that gives you a mental image of, you know, okay, no, first shot's over, let's try again. Second shot's under, third shot, yes, we're on, sort of thing. So there's that story side, but there's also the balance side. And in version 4, one of the things that caused the redesign of the artillery rules from where they were in the old versions to where they are now was a game where Andy Duncan was attacking with a bunch of Valentines with 25-pounders supporting them. And basically, he got stuck in a choice between either going in with his Valentines now while the anti-tank guns were still operational, or sitting back and giving the anti-tank guns time to fire while the artillery tried to deal with them. And in the old versions, the artillery would take a very long time to deal with them. And we were playtesting the early versions of editions or early playtest versions of V4 using very much the V3 artillery rules. And it was like, okay, if you want artillery to work with an attacking force, which is where artillery should be the strongest power, it needs to be a lot faster in the game. And it needs to actually ramp up its destructiveness quickly. So if you're firing just a quick bombardment and hoping for a lucky shot while you do something, it still needs to be relatively ineffective. But rather than having to sit there for 5-8 turns bombarding to kill something, we need to get it so that it's killing stuff now. And in 2 or 3 turns, my artillery's done its job and it's time to assault or to attack or whatever I want. And that sort of led to the repeat bombardment rules with the reroll saves and so forth. So again, I suppose that ties in with the varying scales. When you start ranging in and fire your first bombardment, that is a very short, quick bombardment. But if you just keep it up, then you've switched from, okay, I need some fire immediately on this hill where I'm getting fire from, to flatten that hill, please, we'll wait. And you've gone from a 15-minute thing. And incidentally, one of the interesting things is there was a thing done in the Italian theater that the average response time in 44 for an American request for fire was 15 minutes. You see in the movies, we need artillery now, and 5 seconds later there's explosions. 15 minutes between the, we need some fire, okay, wait, we'll come back to you, and then 15 minutes later explosions start occurring. The New Zealand system, which was used by the British, got rid of a lot of the delays, and they could get it down to 5 to 10 minutes. But even the fastest calls for fire were 5 minutes. And that's in the system that everybody in the Western world uses now, the ABCUS system, I think. Yeah, so it isn't a fast thing even in that 1 turn immediate thing. And then when you sit back and say, okay, give me an hour or 2 on that hill to flatten it, that's when you're getting your re-roll saves and so forth. So trying to get the balance between being able to kill those anti-tank guns fast enough to make artillery relevant to an attacking game, and at the same time, not making it sort of the thing that does all the work. So, yep, it needs to be lethal because otherwise it's pointless, although pinning things down is its immediate role. But at the same time, it needs to be slow enough that even if you're the one being hammered by it, you've got time to win the game around it. So like a lot of things in Flames of War, where it's like, oh, I don't have a counter to that. Well, then don't worry about it. Go and win the game. People are like, oh, how do I defeat Tigers? Don't worry about them. Win the game. How do I, I'm getting pounded by artillery. Don't worry about it. You're going to last for 4 or 5 turns before the artillery destroys those guns and infantry on that objective. If you can't win the game in 4 or 5 turns, then you've lost anyway. So don't worry about it. Let the artillery pound them. Let them waste their time waiting 4 or 5 turns before they attack your infantry. That's 4 or 5 turns you've got to win the game. So yeah, trying to get that balance between immediate useful effect, long-term lethality, and still giving the opponent time to go, okay, I'm going to lose that platoon in about 3 turns. Right, okay, what am I going to do? And that sort of, I think, hopefully answers the question somewhat.
Very good. Well, Mark, Ed, we've gone for about 40 minutes on just philosophy and design. Do you have any questions in this area before we start moving into the SS book?
Yeah, I actually have one more to hit from the chat box. It is from Eric. He was actually when certain of the older stuff, since he's been playing since I believe he said it was version 2, when some of the older stuff would come back, for example, the Italian infantry guns and the 75mm artillery gun, will we start seeing some more of the unofficial player submitted cards getting reviewed and added? And for one, I'm a big fan of some of that stuff you guys have reviewed and added to the unofficial cards. What are the chances are we would see some more of those?
Very high. Yeah. With unfortunately, some of you may have dealt with Alex, who worked for Battlefront in the past. Unfortunately, no longer works for us, but he's left me with a pile of community submitted user cards, which I need to basically spend a bit of time on, go through, compile up, and then run through the company for some approvals. I think we actually got a question in one of our live streams. You know, why have these not been coming out faster? And Pete actually put his hand up and said, "Well, I'm told that I'm the problem." So they will be coming, and actually the Italian ones. It's good you asked about the Italian guns, because I think those would be one of the first sets of cards you would see coming out, purely because I think 99% of the work has been done for those. It just requires people up the food chain to actually say, yeah, it's okay to put them up on the website.
Okay, and then one more question. I believe you'd answered part of the question on a Twitch stream you guys did earlier, which was that Team Yankee would not be getting command cards. And I was curious on what went into the decision to say no to command cards for Team Yankee.
I'm hoping Phil's got a good answer for that one.
Okay. It's more of a reverse thing there, in that because Team Yankee came out before the version 4 of Flames of War, there were no command cards at that point. And when Flames of War came out, there was demand from various parts of the organization that we have something like command cards. And initially there were more things like the lucky card, the charge card, the hold the building card, and so forth. But to a degree, they've evolved more into specific unit representations and so forth. And in the Second World War, there are a lot of specific units, historical units, that have participation in particular actions that people know of and want. And it really does matter there. In Team Yankee, the structure of the game is a bit different in that it's a what if. And if you want your 52nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, yes, I know there's no such thing, that's why I picked it, to be modeled in the game, then the tools are available there. But we're not going to arbitrarily assign some differences from the standard for those. So I think that's probably, it's not actually my decision, but I'm trying to interpret what I understand from the decision makers' things. It's not really something that adds a lot to Team Yankee compared with Flames of War. Would you sort of agree that's a reasonable statement, Chris?
Yeah, I think so. I know we've had a lot of people ask for them, but I think, as you say, that's a pretty good verbalization of kind of, I guess, what is a collective thought in the studio as well. Yeah.
So I think there's only one. There's one question. I think it was earlier on that we lost in the text, and that's a guy Nick who asks, to put it in a bit more context as well. Flames of War. One of the great things of it is we can cover multiple periods, so we can go all the way from moderns. We go back to the Great War thus far, and he asks, is there thoughts of going back to Napoleonics or even to ancients?
Pete has been interested in this question for a long, long time, easily more than 10 years. But the resources in Battlefront to create things are limited, and it's not something that has got to the stage of being anything that we can sell. So yes, for over a decade, we've been sort of looking at that question on and off and investigating it and trying different approaches and so forth, but not yet.
All right. Well, I think it might be a good time for us to move into the SS book. So, Mark, why don't you start off with your question you had?
Yeah. So this is obviously the first dedicated SS book we've had. We've obviously seen them in Flames of War before, and while like Devil's Charge focused, there was quite a lot of SS in it. Obviously, by the start of those books, were balanced against the Allies. What's made you decide now to do them as a separate force?
The size and style of the V4 books is quite compact, which was a very deliberate decision to make them accessible to players and a new player and so forth. They pick up D-Day German, and it's got a lot of variety, but not a lot of complexity to it. It's got a lot of depth and richness, but not a lot of complexity. You go in, you go, okay, I like that tank. Okay, here's the force for this tank. You can then go and buy a command card pack to get a variety of things around that, but it's still going to be basically an Army Panzer IV company or whatever that you're looking at. We did consider just handling the SS via command cards, but given that 50% of the armor in the Normandy campaign was SS, it didn't seem like the best way of handling it. So this is possibly, we've got lots of details to work out about all of the later stuff, but possibly one of the few, if not the only, dedicated SS book we'll do, because there was such a big part of the Normandy story. So I think that sort of encompasses a lot of it.
So what new units are they just going to be the same units with different stat lines? And what new models will we see with the new D-Day SS?
Because the SS was essentially organized exactly the same, well, not exactly the same, but essentially the same as an army division, there's not a lot of radical new equipment and so forth. In fact, because the SS arrived, well, a lot of the older SS divisions arrived back from the Eastern Front just before D-Day and were still in the process of rebuilding when the Allies landed. A lot of their equipment is actually older or less up-to-date than the Army ones. So the things you'll see in here that you wouldn't see in D-Day German, for instance, tend to be more the weird and wonderful things. They've got some of the older armored cars still. One of the, yeah. But yeah, I can't think of the other thing I was going to say, but mostly, yeah, it's the same stuff, but from a totally different perspective. Whereas the German D-Day German book focuses on divisions like the 2nd Panzer Division and so forth that were fully rebuilt, fully trained. They were what the Germans wanted a division to look like at the time. They had half their infantry in half tracks. They had full units of Panzer IVs and Panthers. They'd had plenty of time to train. They were ready to go. Whereas the SS were either still in their training and really just starting, or they'd just only arrived back from the Eastern Front as a shell after a solid year of hard fighting and being rebuilt. So a very different feel for them, very determined, very fanatical troops, but they just lack the time to integrate the new troops into their units and lack the fancy equipment and stuff of the army.
I imagine that the SS command cards will have some variations, like for the what is it, the 12th SS, the Gungan.
Yep, each SS division has its command card that adjusts it slightly. The book itself is more the 1st and 12th SS, which were a pair. The 12th SS was basically cut off from the, or, you know, a cadre taken from the 1st SS and rebuilt. But you know, the 9th and 10th SS were quite distinct in their capabilities and so forth. The 2nd SS had its own history and background and so forth. So yeah, each division has its own thing going on the game.
All right. We got another question from James McMillan, and he's asking about earlier and other divisions you consider going with a 4+ save. I guess something like the we had for the hero, no, not the hero units, the non-hero units in mid-war, the more crazy Russians, if you will, the less experienced ones. So that's not going to be applied in this version of the SS, is it?
At this point, the SS are still trained. They've gone through basic training. They've had some unit training, and they are still properly trained troops. They still know how to fight. But they're very green. They're still learning the job. They're not the veterans that other units have. So they're not yet at the position of pulling people straight from sort of civilian life to combat in an incredibly short period of time, which the Russians had with their lower save. Wayne Turner, the D-Day SS is actually the last of the Flames of War books that I've done, and well, at least in the foreseeable future, the last one I'll be doing. I've been moving on to other projects. And Wayne Turner has done the Bagration books, which you'll be seeing coming out soon, and he's working on the Bulge books and so forth. And he's looking at how to represent SS later in the war, when their level of training and the time they had and the equipment and so forth started getting very chaotic. So how he chooses to represent them at that point is something that I don't think he's fully settled yet, but I'm sure he'll love to tell you about that in a year's time.
That was good. So what is your favorite thing about the SS book? If this is your last Flames of War project for a bit, and what is your main jam in this tome?
That it creates a totally different play style for the Germans. It creates a new flavor, which is historical and matches their actual performance. And at the same time, if you think that paying so many points for the Germans is just way too expensive and you don't get enough stuff and so forth, well, here you can have some partly or mostly trained but not veteran Germans with the same kit, a lot cheaper and more aggressive, and you'd have to treat them differently. You can't try the cleverness that you have to use with the normal Germans of making sure that everything's sort of looking after itself and doing its job. These guys, for me, they feel sort of like my 7th Armoured Division Cromwells, in that they start with a bigger force, but they're going to go downhill faster. So you've got to win the game quickly with these guys, because with a 3+ save, if the enemy's got stuff that's hurting you, they're hurting you a lot faster. So while you've got the advantage, you've got to be aggressive and win. And that sort of feels like a very SS sort of thing.
One thing I remember you all talking about on earlier Twitch TV discussions was that there was going to be some bonus for being in the proximity of the company commander.
Yep.
Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, the old hand rule says that anybody within 6 inches, 15 centimeters of the formation commander, the company commander, can use their tactics rating. So the troops on average are trained, so they'll pass tactics on 4+. But if the boss is with them, he's been around a long time, he knows how this works, and he basically leads them through the process and, okay, guys, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and your tactics go back to 3+.
And Mark, I know you had a question specifically about tigers. You want to engage in that one?
That's actually Ed's.
Oh, I thought, was that Ed's? Okay, Ed, sorry.
So I have a buddy who plays British quite a bit, and he knows what's coming with this SS book, and he's really worried about how he's going to deal with what he calls these beast tigers. What would be the way that you would say, with what's been released with Fortress Europe and the British D-Day book, on how we could deal with these beast tigers?
Same way you deal with any tigers, really. Either you kit up with lots and lots of big guns to take them on head to head, and the British are well positioned for that if you want to go with that. Or you go, okay, so you've got 6 tigers, or 3 tigers. 3 tigers is even better. You go, okay, fine. My viewpoint is sort of like you feed the tigers. you give them something to keep them entertained and busy and not doing something that's stopping you from winning the game. And at the same time, you go and win the game somewhere else. And if he's got 6 tigers, well, you go, okay, I will keep half of them entertained over here while the rest of my force goes and takes the objective and or kills the tigers if they get in the way. And flank shots into tigers, it doesn't sound very good when you've got to roll a 1 with the tiger, but if most of your force is concentrating on 2 or 3 tigers, it doesn't take long before they sort of start rolling those 1s and start sort of falling apart. If the other 2 or 3 tigers can't go away because there's an objective there that you're threatening, and I like to do that with something like universal carriers. Oh, look, my 3 universal carriers is being opposed by 3 tigers, but you can't move those 3 tigers away, because if you do, my universal carriers will take the objective. What a waste of 3 tigers. Now, usually my opponent's not generous enough to allow me to get quite that level of distraction, but that same concept of putting a credible threat against the objective that's small enough that the bulk of my force can take on tigers. As I said, my British are often either motor infantry or Cromwells, and I don't have like typically 3 or 4 17-pounders in my entire force. Not a thing to take tigers on head to head with, but you can still outmaneuver them and use the 17-pounders to keep them honest and shoot them in the flanks if you have to, and just keep the pressure on. And
literally in one of the tournaments I played in, that exact scenario happened, where I had some universal carriers keeping some tigers pinned down just because they couldn't afford to leave the area and let those things run around. So thank you for the scout rule to make them concealed and on the ground even when they're moving, because he just could never get hits on those little guys. So great. So any other questions from Mark and Ed on the SS book?
No, I don't think on the book, no.
And folks, you can add, if you got any specific questions, I guess something about the new Panthers, anything about how the Panthers are played. I know that the Panthers are now a little bit cheaper, right? So there's more opportunity for us to get Panthers on the board. You want to talk about Panthers real quick before we talk about upcoming timelines?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been surprised about is people's reluctance to try Panthers. Oh, they're overpointed. In playtesting, we had them a point cheaper apiece at the beginning, and they were winning 75% of their games, which sort of is a bit too high for balance. They were almost a win button. And people say, oh, but I only get a few points for my force. But you usually, if you've got a Panther force, a company of Panthers, you'll have a whole extra platoon. And now with the SS, you can have a whole couple of extra platoons. Problems, of course, you're also being hit on 3+, which means that you're going to have to make use, as I said, of that extra strength. But, Panthers are hard to take from the front. And if you're fast and aggressive at killing the things that can kill you from the front, it might buy you enough time to kill the things that are coming at you from the flank. And if you know what you're doing, Panthers can be very, very, very nasty, either with the army ones or with the SS ones. At the tournament that's coming up in a month or so here, I'm sort of taking Panthers for the first time. I'm still debating between whether I want to take them as SS or take them as army. The extra Panther I get for going SS sounds attractive, but I also know that if somebody gets Shermans on my flank hitting me on 3+, it is going to be unpleasant. So it's a toss-up of, do I think I can kill them faster with the extra guns, or do I play a slower, more careful game and keep picking people off and try and stay alive? And still debating that one.
Excellent. So we've had you plan to be online for an hour. Can you spend a little bit more time with us? We'd like to kind of get into the some future questions and timeline. If you can hang a bit longer.
Oh, Chris will be the one answering that, but
yeah, no, I've got a bit more time.
All right. So we got a question here from that Mitch gave us. He wanted to know, particularly with COVID and reduction in actual face-to-face gaming, has there actually been a increase in sales as people are trying to get their lockdown hobby projects in?
It's kind of a hard one to answer, really. The reason for that is obviously for a few months there, we saw a massive drop in sales as stores were closed. So yeah, we did see some growth in our direct sales, but at the end of the day, we'd much rather see people buying from stores because that's how you really maintain and grow a community. I have seen some data with once stores started to open again, you saw a lot of restocks happening. So I think probably no data, bit of a subjective answer. I think a lot of people have pulled out the projects that have been sitting under their desks or half finished and taken this as a chance to go and finish them off. At the same time, they've probably then gone and said, I owned 80% of this army. I will find a way to pick up the missing 20%. And I know here in New Zealand, it was interesting. We were working from home, but as you do, we sort of chatted on and off all day. And it was interesting watching the retailers in New Zealand go out of stock very quickly. It wasn't, obviously when we initially went into lockdown, nothing could be shipped, no stores were open. But over time, we gained a limited ability for certain shops and retailers to open. And you just watched things that they've probably had on their shelves for the last 3 years disappear. And it was a case of a couple of items that I was sort of on the fence on, do I buy, do I not buy? In hindsight, I wish I'd jumped in earlier because someone else went and grabbed them and I found myself without anything to work on at certain points. So yeah, a bit of a boost, a bit of a not boost, a bit of old stock disappearing off the shelves.
Well, speaking of stock on the shelves, with the new U.S. stuff coming in for the Team Yankee U.S., to be specific. So you guys were discussing, at least Pete was discussing, whether the U.S. infantry was going to be metal or thermoplastic. That was still kind of up in the air on the last time I noted. Is there any further resolution on that? Because I'm about to buy it.
Yeah, no, it's staying metal. At the moment, we're trying to push as much as we can, towards thermoplastic. It's just one of those things where it takes a bit more time than we expect. We go in all guns blazing thinking, we can turn everything over, we can move everything, it'll be fine, it'll be easy. And then suddenly you realize you've got quite a depth of product. You've got quite a large range of stuff to move over. And actually having the factory shut down for a couple of months really hurt a lot of our plans. So no technical constraints, just unfortunately time and quantity.
We all know the long production planning timeline for the hard plastics. How much, I haven't heard if it's any quicker for the thermoplastics. I assume it is because I've heard they're kind of they're allowed undercut, so it's more of a rubber kind of a mold. Can you give us an idea what the timeline difference is on those?
Yeah, it can be a lot shorter. Basically, you're not cutting a tool out of steel. Yeah, you're forming a tool around masters. So effectively, if you were doing nothing else completely in isolation, you could go from either a physical sculpted master or a 3D rapid prototyped master and into a mold and then producing off it within a few weeks, as opposed to months for a hard plastic tool.
I'm a big fan of the plastics. I have not had the thermoplastic in my hands yet. Was hoping this would be my first one. I guess I'll have to be maybe the SS infantry. I guess will be something I'll pick up. But
they will be.
I'm hoping that as we move forward, that you're able to go back and do things like winter infantry and thermoplastic. Things that winter infantry are really heavy in metal because of all those extra overcoats. It was something I'd like to see lightened up a bit.
Yeah, I would hope so for the bulge as well. I've got 2/3 of my reversible Parker German infantry force painted, and I'd love for the remaining third to not weigh as much. Here in New Zealand, we use a lot of, they're called file master boxes, which I conveniently have one behind me. And they're just full scat sized cardboard boxes, and they're perfect for storing armies in. Because they're cardboard, you put an old IS-2 army in there and they just do that. So moving towards more plastic and thermoplastic will be great. The bookshelves that you can't see over to my right that are sagging as well will love me for it too.
So is there any plan to do tanks in thermoplastic, or just sticking with infantry?
We've done some experiments, mainly with just tank tracks and stuff like that. Who knows is the short answer. At the moment, getting the capacity and everything going right for infantry is the key. Once we can honestly say we've nailed that and done everything that we want to do, then that can be an option. Certainly some of the smaller vehicles, we experimented with universal carriers as one-piece resin casts with no base on them. There's no reason that something like that wouldn't work perfectly. It's just a bit of a, we'll have to see, I guess.
Great. So if we don't have any other questions from Ed or Mark, and I don't think too many are in there, something about East Germans, and I guess I'll just tie into what we're going to cover here. I'm going to run down the Twitch timeline that I understand from your last broadcast, and hopefully you can update us or confirm or deny that it's still on track or shifted to the right, which would not be unexpected, right? All the stuff going on. So just trying to make sure we understand where we're going. So we have right now, July, Team Yankee US is out. I already got my book, yay. And then next month, August, SS for Normandy that we've been talking about.
Yep. So I'll see your book and raise you a book.
All right, there you go.
Yep. So a little plug. We'll have a live launch for that in about two or so weeks' time. Yep. 3 weeks.
Phil had his out earlier. In September, we roll into Bagration with starting off with the Soviets. There you go.
Oh boy, look at that.
You could just pop that in the post.
Soviets.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah.
Yep, Bagration Soviets are all on track.
And then November, Team Yankee Soviet.
I think they'll either be November or December.
Okay.
I'm going a little bit off memory there. There's nothing as such holding them up. You've seen pictures of the T-80 plastic being casually spoiled with no marketing plan. Just throw it out there. On the
That was a
Yankee
really
group.
brilliantly awkward moment.
Yeah. So no. Everything for that is currently under control and looks good. Touch wood.
Yeah. And we've got a chat question here, so long as we're on Bagration. They're asking about, I know in the Twitch TV, there was some discussion about some special terrain, I think river assaults versus beach assaults and some other things coming up. And
so we have, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes, we have, we did the beach assaults cardboard terrain pack and the bocage one. So we've got a river assaults one. This is actually one of Pete's personal sort of hobby horses actually, is we've played, we're lucky obviously in the office, we've got a bespoke D-Day board, which over the years we've played a lot of games on. I still have a few nightmares from playtesting under version 3, those rules. Played a lot of beach games. But because we have that luxury, if we want, it's easy enough to go and throw down once a year, once every couple of years, whatever, and do some beach landing games. I don't have room in my house. I've got kids and stuff. There's no way I'm going to store a beach landing table. So he sort of pushed for this concept of these terrain packs that just make it easy. So yeah, beach landing pack, it all fits inside an envelope. The bocage fits inside one of our ubiquitous file master boxes. River assaults. No one wants, well, not no one, but not many of us have enough space for a whole table with a 12-inch wide river and landing craft and boats and stuff like that. So there is a beach assault terrain pack coming out with a full river with it's got bridges, cardboard bridges, railway bridges, rules for how to conduct the assaults and all that sort of stuff.
Great. And Jeffrey Hill had a specific question about the I believe they were going to be plastic. We were going to have them in Stalingrad, some plastic ruined city type block things. And I think they're now, at least at one point there's discussion they'd be part of Bagration. Is that still the plan?
Yep, they're all go. The packaging's all done. Everything is on track for those. So they will come out as part of the Bagration release. We've changed, it was going to be 2 different boxes, sort of a box of straights and bits and a box of corners and stuff. We've consolidated into one just to make it easier. You can basically build a sort of a 12 by 12 inch ruined city building from each pack, or you can be quite creative. Victor, Wayne, Casey and myself are sort of still planning to do a bit of a series of painting and how you can hobby around with them and so on. So yeah, stay tuned for that.
Great. One long-term goal I have is to build the entire Orsha rail yard from the Stalin's Onslaught book. And I'm going to expand it out another 2 feet so it could be an actual 4x6, because I think it's just a 4x4 in the scenario. So I've been eyeing that for like about a decade now. This might help me get there. So, okay. Yep. And let's move into 2021. I see some more chat questions, and I think they're going to help tie in with this. So that gets us up to January, Bagration German, and that's kind of where we left off. And then in April, we were talking Axis, late war allies. I guess it'd be the Hungarians and Romanians.
Yep, so we're still doing design work for that. In theory, that's as far as the world keeping turning and nothing going too far astray, it shouldn't move too far from that. Obviously, we're not talking that far in the future, but it's far enough that it doesn't take much to kind of jolt the schedule around a little bit. But that's still our intention.
Okay. And I'll put the next two together. We had hitting the bulge with the U.S. in June of 21, and then the Germans in August of 21.
Yeah, it's definitely still the order, at least.
And then this is the part that I don't know. I must have written this down wrong from the last Twitch TV podcast, Twitch TV cast that y'all did. But it had Bush Wars in late 21 and Checkpoint Charlie both in late 21. Is that?
Yeah, that's where we're starting to get to the very fuzzy end of it. Bush Wars is definitely one of Pete's favorite things he's been pushing for years. And actually around the studio, we're all pretty excited about Checkpoint Charlie. Love the excuse to get some Centurions and stuff. So timing, putting my, I know how busy everyone is and how crazy the world is. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of these things move around a little bit. But once again, they will still be there. That's the plan, is to still have both of those. It just, the when might be a little different.
Right. And we've got 2 questions from Eric, one from earlier. He was asking about East Germans. So I guess through this, we're basically saying East Germans no earlier than late 21, probably, because we haven't mentioned them in the Team Yankee East Germans, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we've been talking a lot in the office about the Warsaw Pact. Obviously, I've got a growing Czechoslovakian army. What we can do to version 2 boost the Warsaw Pact forces. It's not like, unfortunately, we can just slap T-80s in everyone's hands, but I'm sure there will be something, whether it's some extra equipment that wasn't released first time around or just a review, but there will be something. Yeah.
Yep. When you talked about the finishing products or projects that you just had that were kind of hanging, well, one of mine is so I've got some early war French stuff. I have my H-39s, H-35s, but I've got some Char Bs and some Renault. So I'm going to do one of the armor battalions versus cavalry battalions, or cavalry squadron, and so that kind of lines into early war. And that was a question Eric had here. So do we have a kind of in a rough idea, or is that just even? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we would not have early war until past version 4. I mean, you're working on so many projects, doing so many things. I mean, I'm ready for it. I know a lot of folks are out there, but is there any idea of a timeline of when we might actually see early war?
We're not working on anything early war at the moment, unfortunately. Like you, I've got Samoas and Lorraine carriers for the infantry to paint. Otherwise, my early war French are largely done, and I'd love an excuse to finish them off. But yeah, at the moment, between Team Yankee and late war, there's just so much on everyone's plates that there just isn't the bandwidth right now.
Well, we still have the conversion book. I know some of my friends in Minneapolis actually just had a early war tournament last weekend, and they had 12 players show up. So there's still a means to get at it if you really want to get at it. So
yeah.
Indeed. Okay. Well, that's, I think, most of the questions that we had. Mark, I know did we miss something? I see you.
So I've just got one really final little one, really. So everyone always gets excited with those little kind of special niche things you bring out. And a lot of people are talking about the hip and the Chinook kind of, rather than game models, but those kind of scenic models you're talking about. If they're a success, two-part question. Firstly, could you see them being applied to Flames of War? Well, no, not a Chinook to Flames of War, that'd be awesome. But as in maybe like a Horsa or a railway gun, something that just sets your table different. And secondly, we all love objectives. And obviously you have your yearly objective, but in the year of COVID, we haven't really been able to get to events. So are you guys thinking of any way for people to be able to get hold of those to keep their collection going for the 2020?
I know there was some talk, which actually I haven't heard anything about, so I'll add it as a to-do list item about releasing a 2020 objective for sale, just so people could grab it easily enough. Like I said, I don't know what ended up happening with that discussion. In terms of it's funny that you say the Horsa, that's the one that comes up around the office the most as a discussion item. It has been discussed 3 or 4 times, the idea of making that as a battlefield in a box terrain piece. And for whatever reason, it's just never happened.
Pretty cool.
Well, I have one question, and this one's kind of towards Phil, because I feel like you may have let a bit of a cat out of a bag. And I see a couple guys in the chat, especially Keith Gilmore, hit on it as well. Phil, you said that you were done, I guess, with Flames of War for this foreseeable future, and you moved on to other projects. That to me is like, oh man, what is Phil working on? What's my next thing I'm gonna get my hands on? Phil, is there anything you can tell us on this? The people are waiting to hear.
Well, most of it's been Gale Force 9 stuff. So Aliens, which is coming out October, is it, Chris?
October.
Yep. I've been working with the final stages of getting that project finished, working on helping Victor get Spartacus re-released, just a last pass over the stuff he's working on, a re-release of Sons of Anarchy with a new theme, working on some other games and things that are not yet quite to a point where I don't think they've been announced yet. So yeah, it's been a lot of Gale Force 9 stuff, and also some sort of long-term planning for where Flames of War, Team Yankee type stuff is going. But that's sort of quite long-term and quite sort of not really going to be useful to tell you about it at this point.
Understood. Thank you for giving us what you did give us.
Yeah. And also, we've got a question from Tyler, and he's talking, and I think I've heard Pete mention something along these lines before. He's talking about the scale, and you know, I know Pete has said we're a 15 millimeter model company, basically. I think I've heard him made that comment 1 or 2 times in the past, and Tyler's asking about other scales, 28 millimeter, but he wants to know what your thoughts are about the past and future of this scale. Is this pretty much the scale that Battlefront is just they've hung their hat on? I know that another game came out recently for it has a 10 millimeter that they're pushing a little bit more, which kind of gets you a little bit more models on the table, anyways. So is that pretty much just a done deal, or is there any consideration of other scales for Battlefront?
I think everything that we do at the moment is currently geared around 15 mil. you can get I guess, corny term, you can get a gaming solution, if you will, between Battlefield in a box, our game mats, the models. It all works together nicely. I don't see any sort of need to change any of that at the moment.
Okay, good deal. Well, Mark, Ed, anything else? I think we've gone 20 minutes over, and greatly appreciate Phil and Chris spending some more time with us.
No, I don't have any more questions. I just want to thank Phil and Chris for joining us. This is taking place instead of Historicon for us. Would love to be at Historicon. And for you guys that don't know, Historicon is really the biggest convention we have on historical gaming on the East Coast at the minimum. And I thank you guys for joining us to try to, give us something while we're, sitting at home.
Mark, any last thoughts?
No, nothing for me. I echo you. Thanks for giving the time up. We're just looking around some of the names on here. It's a great turnout on here, and it'll be up online as well. And from us in the UK, obviously it's the open day next year being G'd up, all being well. So hopefully you guys start pestering Pete now to get your air ticket out.
Yeah. I know he'll be dying to be over there. He'd love to get out of the country and go somewhere.
He still owes me a game that we tried to get in at the last.
And we do greatly appreciate you all taking the time to spend with us on a day off for you on a Sunday in New Zealand for you. And for those out there, this, as Mark just said, this will be posted. It'll be available on YouTube at a later date. And also, both Breakthrough Assault and No Dice No Glory have fairly active forums. So if you want to continue the discussion there and jump on board, we'd love to continue to chat and talk about how we're going to make great use out of the new SS book and the new Team Yankee stuff and US stuff. So great things. So with unless I'll leave the last word for Phil and Chris. Any last thoughts from you all?
No, it's great to be here, and it's good to see everybody finding ways to sort of continue gaming and doing things during this difficult time. So look after yourselves all and stay well.
Hey, before you guys go, this is Mitch. I have a pass on from HMGS. They want to thank you guys so very much for showing up. And if we do this again, and it sounds like we will, you guys will always be welcome back. So thank you guys so very much for being here today. This has been an amazing talk. And I'll turn it back to Tom, but HMGS wanted to make sure I thanked you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, guys, thank you. I think that's pretty much a wrap, and we look forward to seeing you on Twitch TV or here or elsewhere. Or we appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you for everybody who tuned in. We at one point, I think the highest I saw was 36 participants. We greatly appreciate everybody tuning in to see what was going on and helping to feed some questions for our guest here. We appreciate it. All right. All right, and we have stopped recording there, Mitch.
So, yeah, we could keep, you guys want to keep recording, that is up to you.
I already stopped.
The fact that you stopped, I could get this online, but you guys had 39, which is pretty good. This is a great summer day here in the United States. But this was for the parts, because the last one ran long, but the parts I listened to, guys, this is really good.
Yeah, did you hit the earlier part when Phil was going over some of the design concepts with Flames of War?
No, but I have to edit the video and upload it, so I will.
Right.
I highly recommend you hear his story on how he got the start on Flames of War. That was not expected whatsoever, and I really enjoyed that.
So I was looking at the chat like online, and people were like, "Holy shit, sorry, this is really good stuff," and I'm like, "Yeah, what do you think?" And they go, "Wait, we could really ask him questions." I go, "You can, doesn't mean no answer."
I think we actually got one way or another everybody's question that I don't think we missed too many of them. Ed pulled some in, I pulled some in, Mark had some as well, so I think did a pretty good job. I was actually thought we would have more questions because on the Twitch TV cast that you all do, you get like 100 questions a minute. They're just flying by. This was actually a very reasonable pace. I don't know if Phil and Chris were trying to read these as we went on, but I thought the tempo of those questions was very moderate. And then allowed me to think about how we'll integrate that into what we've already been talking about or other stuff we've had on our question list. That was pretty good.
And it was a very grown-up audience. We didn't have to moderate anything.
No. I don't. What do we need moderators for? It was just fun. Just a good deal.
You know why? It's because they won't say anything to Chris or Phil's face. Oh wait, I don't want to get banned for life off one of the boards. I think that's really what it comes out to, and I don't blame them. And you know, it was interesting. So at one of the previous ones, we talked about, this is with Warlord, a social contract between gamers and developers. And I said, yeah, that's an interesting one. At what point do gamers accept responsibility for these little nitnoid things they want in games that they say, you know, I'm going to play this way because Phil and Chris are not coming to my house and taking my dice away.
Yeah.
But
we're working on that project.
Do you know what's really... It's funny you say that, Mitch, because I'm the same thing. So Flames of War, I obviously, what I'm interested in, I play majority of my time. And I play by the rules and very rigid to the rules. And it's the competitive game I play. I don't just play.
You're a very good player.
But I stick to the rules. But today I was playing Northag. And you know what? We were chopping and changing and going, well, this makes sense and this makes sense. And it's just quite how you approach different games, how you feel about them and how you play them can be really, really vary.
One thing I'll say that has built up a lot of optimism for me was when Chris Townley said that he had a stack of unofficial cards to go through, get the yes or nay.
Oh yeah.
Because I over half of my collection has literally just been sitting in the glass cabinet, and I know a lot of people have. We all have those small niche things that no one really. It's not a lot of popular unit, but they did one good thing in one game, and it's something they will always remember, and they want to put it back on the table and try to relive that moment. So I'm glad to hear that even if the progress is going to be slow, it may be a while. I am glad to hear that is coming. That has a lot of optimism for me.
Yeah, we're using him in the Firestorm Gazala campaign. One of the greatest joys of this last turn was that Matildas get to be in the fight. So we get to use that player generated card. And I know some of the earlier games included the 47 millimeter. Was it the Panzerjäger one? The German.
Yep.
Some guys are using that, and some of the folks in Minnesota I know were actually playing with 2-pounder anti-tank guns. They had just I guess I don't think there's a player card for that, but they just made the change so they could actually deploy the correct weapon system for the Gazala time frame. So you've given us a good framework to tweak and add, and I know we get a lot of grief. People will say, this is not available anymore, or this is not there. Well, if you want to play it in a scenario, it's not hard to come up with a little self card to put it in there. It's just a question whether you need it for tournaments and official play. Well, there's a lot of workarounds and analogs for things. So I think I kind of prefer the more concise books, the more limited scope of things, particularly on the competitive side. And then when it comes to historical scenario gaming, everything's there, and I can build and launch off and adjust and edit what you've already given us to fill out what we need for the historical scenario. So, anyways, a little thought on that.
So I love the variety that all the different stuff adds in. It makes each game different when someone brings something, almost completely different. That's what got me into tournament play, was playing 3 different armies in a day instead of seeing a lot of cookie cutter list. And, like I said, hearing that stuff's coming back is pretty exciting. And I'm really looking forward to Bagration and see how that's going to change things. With the black box options for you to be able to take Soviets, I think that Soviet players will have a basket of stuff they can take to their list they haven't been able to in version 3 and version 2 that they should really be jiving when that comes out.
And hey, we got all the way through a chat and no one asked about when wildcards are coming, so that's progress.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to say it to their faces. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Gamers are cowards. I mean, come on, man. Yeah, it
all becomes a bit real when the video's there, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's like, I never said that. Well, we have video evidence that you did. And,
fake news.
Yeah, it's just, look, I could create fake news. Give me a half hour. But yeah, and then, hey, so big question I think us and Big Through Assault have is, you guys have anything for us? The Firestorm campaign was awesome. Is there anything we should be doing more or less of?
Well, we should do more collaboration.
I want to do more collaboration with Mark. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
One day I will beat him in Flames of War. He's a really good player. And he doesn't cheat. I was waiting for him to cheat.
Tabletop Simulator.
You mean you haven't realised I recoded Tabletop Simulator for more sixes?
Yeah.
He wouldn't have helped you the way you. I mean, just like taking through the game, and like Matt Varnish and I were talking, like, boy, he kicked. Matt goes, he kicked my ass. I go, he's a pretty good player. I mean, you're not. You didn't even. That game was over in 3 turns.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's more. I think it's more when you got front armor 9, and you managed to take out the packs.
Good deal. Well, guys, we definitely appreciate you hanging on for a little bit longer. I'm sure. I mean, we had such a good discussion on the first portion. I mean, it went 40 minutes just on the design and background of the game, and then got another 20 minutes or so on the SS. So by the time we got to going into the future, we were already at that hour point. So I know most of it's, and I knew that that anything after January was just going to be subject to circumstances, but still like to always try to stay on top of where we are, because on the forums, that's one of the most common questions we see is like, well, when is this coming out? When's that coming out? So I like to try to make sure I'm up to date and can share that as those questions populate.
And Phil, to answer your question from before, this should be online within an hour after the meeting ends. So I will send both you guys the link. Hopefully in an hour. I don't think I mean, you guys talked a lot, but I don't think it's going to be a monster file.